Got it. I'm excited. You're excited. You're excited, and I'm excited. Summit. Thanks, honey. Thanks so much for being here. And everybody, welcome, family. It's good to see some familiar faces and some new faces. I'm Nadia, and incredibly grateful recovered alcoholic and addict. And we are swimming, digging around in the forward to the second edition. We're still there. Well, not we're still there. We're still in the beginning of the book. So this is a really great time for those who want to join in. And let's see what's in here. We're going to start off. I'll just read forward to second edition. Figures given in this forward describe the fellowship as it was in 1955. Since the original forward to this edition, to this book, was written in 1939, a wholesale miracle has taken place. Our earliest printing voiced the hope that every alcoholic who journeys will find the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous at his destination. Already, continues the early text, 2s and 3s and 5s of us have sprung up in other communities. I'll continue to read a little bit more. 16 years have elapsed between our first printing of this book and the presentation in 1955 of our second edition. In that brief space, Alcoholics Anonymous has mushroomed into nearly 6,000 groups, whose membership is far above 150,000 recovered alcoholics. Groups are to be found in each of the United States and all of the provinces of Canada. AA has flourishing communities in the British Isles, the Scandinavian countries, South Africa, South America, Mexico, Alaska, Australia, and Hawaii. All told, promising beginnings have been made in some 50 foreign countries and US possessions. Some are just now taking shape in Asia. Many of our friends encourage us by saying that this is but a beginning, only the augury of a much larger future ahead. Little did they know, little did they know. Oh my gosh. Okay, so let's go check it out right in the beginning. My favorite, I highlighted this and I used this not loosely. And I'm sure for those that have been here before, you've heard me use the word miracle. I use that word all the time, because just being in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, just being in a meeting of CA, any of the 12-step meetings, sitting here with these squares in front of me, you guys, these beautiful beaming faces looking at me, and there's just so much love here. You're miracles. We were dead people. We were dead, deaf, and blind, lame people, no power. We were dying. We were probably dead men walking. And the fact that you're all of you are sitting here, we've got pens in hands, everyone's like keen to hear what this book's got to tell us, smiling, shining. I can feel you. You're a miracle, okay? And there are many more we get to see when we do this work, especially in our 12-step work. We get to see lights come back on. We get to see faces, the wrinkles smoothen out. So this is a wholesale miracle. Absolutely. Bill, jump in.
I just want to say something that came to me for the first time in reading this. Apparently, I didn't pay much attention. It's talking about Alcoholics Anonymous started in the United States. And when you were reading the different locations where Alcoholics Anonymous has now gone to, they say Alaska and Hawaii. Those are states in the United States. So I looked it up. They weren't adopted as states until 1959. And the forward to the second edition came out in 1955. If they were writing the book today, it would say the United States. There wouldn't be mention of Alaska and Hawaii. I just thought that was interesting because I paid no attention in junior high or high school, believe me.
Well, you're paying attention today. So I like Googling words, okay? Miracle. Google says that miracle is a remarkable event that brings very welcome consequences. Absolutely. We can all echo that, right? And here's another promise. Just in the first 4 sentences of this forward to the second edition. Here's one of the the second promises, because we get to see wholesale miracles. Here's the second promise: the hope that every alcoholic who journeys will find the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous at his destination. And it says here that 2s and 3s and 5s of us have sprung up in other communities. I live in I'm from South Africa, or I'm in South Africa currently, and this is where I was born and raised. And I live in a fishing village about 2 hours from one of the main cities of South Africa, where one of our international airports are. And it's not hugely populated. It's a holiday destination. It's not a residential area. And since I've been here since 2014, I've witnessed 6 other little meetings mushroom up, right? Pop up just in our little area. But there's something else that I've witnessed. And I love what it speaks about here, because it names all these different countries and continents, right? I've been sponsored by someone in Toronto, Canada. I have sponsored people in America and the UK. I mean, that's a miracle in its own right, because I would have just sat and that was by God's powerful hand through a very difficult time that we've all been through, where this Zoom explosion happened. And I get to see my brothers and sisters from America, from Canada, from Sweden, Australia. I mean, I've shared in Moscow. Bill's been with me. I've shared in Moscow. Just recently been asked to share in India. I mean, this is amazing, right? This is what we get to experience, guys. And another thing that I wanted to make note of here is that AA is today in 180 countries, and there are 195 countries in the world. How's that for mushrooming? And how did this happen? The power of God and 12-step work. One alcoholic carrying this message to another alcoholic. I mean, is that just not incredible? Combine those two, and almost every single country in the world will have a meeting. It doesn't matter where you go on holiday. It doesn't matter where you'll find yourself. You will most definitely, most probably find a meeting of AA or a brother or a sister in this fellowship. Mr. Swan, have you got something to say?
I'm actually looking, I think it's in a vision for you. I'm trying to find out exactly where what you just referred to was listed in the book. It talks about 2s or 3s or 5s of us sprung up. I want to say that it's in a vision for you, but I'm running out of pages. I'm probably wrong. So Steve probably knows where that is. Anyhow, go ahead. I'm going to look I'm going to peruse while you do that. We want to hold the meeting.
All right,
up
cool. So what I'm also going to do is, what I'm going to make note of is how many concepts are repeated over and over in the book. So it says here right in the beginning, remarkable. Okay, so a wholesale miracle. If we look at the definition, it's a remarkable event. So let's look at where remarkable is mentioned in the big book. Page 63. I'm just going to quickly read them. You can make little notes next to the word miracle. Page 63, when we sincerely took such a position, all sorts of remarkable events followed. On page 100, working with others, if you persist, remarkable things will happen. There's many references to miracles in the big book, guys. Page 133, but we have seen remarkable transformations in our bodies. Man, come on, this doesn't get better than this. In the second edition we just made, today, the remarkable unity of AA is one of the greatest assets that our society has. So we really do get to witness wholesale miracles. Another note that I made here is this mushrooming of 6,000 groups into 150,000 recovered alcoholics. There's that word again. There's another promise. 3 promises, and we haven't even really kicked off in the forward to the second edition, right? Bill, have you found what you're looking for? I think Bill's signal didn't look great, Nana, so he'll check in when he can. I'm going to continue. Oh, there he is.
My signal's fine. One of my guys was calling me from WhatsApp. Actually, I think that it was actually in Bill's story. I mean, that bothers me now that I didn't know right where it was. But he talks about in the book when it talks about in this forward that you just read, forward to the second edition. Where does it say the little 2s and 3s popped up in the second paragraph? Hello? Do you remember where you read it?
Yeah, it's in the first paragraph.
In the first paragraph. Okay, right. It's spelled out. It wasn't numbered. Okay. Already continues the early text. 2s and 3s and 5s of us have sprung up in other communities. It's talked about that in the book in another location. And I thought it was either in a vision for you or working with others. And I thought it might be in Bill's story. So anyway, would have been on the last page if it was, right?
I think you may be making reference to that.
I'm
Okay,
probably
well,
making
you
it
keep-
up. Yes, I like to make things up.
No,
I
no,
like to
no.
say things that no one else
You-
can disprove. It's in
You'll
here, I
find it.
promise you. I just don't know where. And Steve's
You'll
letting me
find it.
flail. I've asked for his help in this. Okay.
All right, we're going to continue reading. The spark that was to flare into the first AA group was struck at Akron, Ohio in June 1935 during a talk between a New York stockbroker and an Akron physician. So we're gonna go into much detail a little bit into the book, but this is again where the hand of God just was guiding us towards the evolution and the start of AA. So Bill W is the New York stockbroker that they're talking about, and after a period of sobriety, he was on his way to business deal, and he was in the Mayfair Hotel, and he was on the threshold of going to the bar or calling an alcoholic, picking up a phone book, thumbing through it, and looking for a place where he could locate an alcoholic. And it was at that T-junction, at that turning point, and he turned to the phone booth to go and make a phone call. Many phone calls, and upon which he eventually found Dr. Bob. And, the rest is history, guys. Again, here we are. Here we sit, and here we have this beautiful book of ours. 6 months earlier, the broker had been relieved of his drink obsession by a sudden spiritual experience following a meeting with an alcoholic friend who had been in contact with the Oxford groups of that day. So here again is some more reference to Bill W, the stockbroker, Dr. Bob, which is the Akron physician, meeting with the alcoholic friend. There was Ebby Thatcher, who came to visit Bill in his kitchen, right? After he had been summoned to court for the 3rd time and had been helped there by Roland Hazard and Siebert Graves who'd found the Oxford group, who'd found the 6 tenets of the Oxford group. We're going to go into that very shortly. It's just these beautiful cosmic little map of God's hand in how we've come about.
Mm-hmm. It was in a vision for you, Nadia. It's on page 162. And some of us are salesmen and go about little clusters of 2s and 3s and 5s of us have sprung up in other communities through contact with our 2 larger centers. I think they were referring to Akron and New York at the time. It's just that they had alluded to it and they said it's in the text. And of course, when we get into the doctor's opinion, and we agnostics and another place in the book talking about a gentleman whose story has been preserved from the first edition and will always stay there in perpetuity because it's mentioned in our text, and that's Fitz Mayo. His story's entitled Our Southern Friend. And that's the one who hid himself in a deserted barn, determined to die, and was saved by a rescue party. So when this book talks about something, we also need to be cognizant of changes that can be made in this book later on. And if you don't stay with someone like, get involved with these platforms that Steve's putting out, and people like him, he's not the only one, to preserve the integrity of the book, the story could get lost along the way. And we say, well, we don't need that story anymore. That one doesn't make any sense. We'll eliminate it. And then when they're talking about it in the doctor's opinion, and in We Agnostics, when it says that a man's story was so convincing, dramatic, and moving, some of it ought to be told now. We would never know what story they're talking about if people didn't preserve this or do these things to say why this is so critical and why the book repeats and refers to itself. If this chapter was changed, right, A Vision for You, now everything's changed, and they didn't talk about little 2s and 3s of clusters, then when they referred to it in the forward to the second edition, we'd have nothing to line it up with. If you know what I'm saying, does that make sense?
It does make sense. I don't know if it's my side. Sorry, I just want to interject here. Rob, can I get a tech check in with you? On my side, it looks like Bill is freezing the whole time, and the audience. Is it me, or is it? It's not me. I'm good. I'm good. I'm flowing. Okay.
I'm freezing.
No,
Is
no,
that
no.
what-
Rob says it's not you, but
No, it's not.
definitely
No,
something
everybody, everything sounds great.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. Now, I just want to, on the bottom of this page, I just want to highlight something here. It says here, the broker had been relieved of his drink obsession by a sudden spiritual experience. In the back of the book, in the Spiritual Awakening Appendix, page 567. This page alludes to the spiritual experience and the spiritual awakening. And the spiritual experience is a sudden emotional sudden displacement of emotions. And again, they make, like Bill just said, no, there's going to be this repeating and this cross-referencing all the time. Again, here it is, sudden spiritual experience. And that has been my experience. But the whole process of going back into inventory, going through the 12 steps again with the newcomer, going back into inventory for myself, another step 5 with the newcomer, another step 5 with myself, has been one big slow awakening. And this is not an overnight matter. It tells us that on page 84. On page 84, it tells us that this is not an overnight matter. The spiritual awakening is something that happens slowly over time. And then he goes on to say here, following a meeting with an alcoholic friend, we just said none of it, that was Abby Thatcher, ABT, who had been in contact with the Oxford group of that day. On page 87, the third paragraph, it tells us to be quick to see where religious people are right. So we're being quick to see where religious people are right. The Oxford groups contributed greatly to our 12-step program. Bill W just doubled up on them. They had 6 tenets, they had 6 steps. We got 12 out of those. But it's important I note this because when I was a newcomer and I came into these rooms and you told me that the Bible had something to do with this or some Christian movement had something to do with this, I would have probably not come back in. I probably would have not come back in. But if I have a newcomer and they ask me, and we're going through the forward to the first edition and the second edition, I got to be honest with them. I'm not going to harp on it, but I got to be honest with them because this is huge, huge contribution to this amazing spiritual program of ours. page 87, the third paragraph. Be quick to see where religious people are right. It's one of the instructions for step 11. He had also been greatly helped by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth, a New York specialist in alcoholism, who is now accounted no less than a medical saint by AA members, and whose story of the early days of our society appears in the next pages. From this doctor, the broker had learned the grave nature of alcoholism, the fatal nature of this disease. I have come and learned in these pages that I won't only die from drinking. I will also die. I will die from this disease without alcohol in me, because I will be at the jumping off point when I come to realize that I can live with alcohol nor without it. If I'm in this program without a spiritual solution, it's not going to be alcohol that's going to kill me. It's going to be the ultimate sacrifice.
I'd like to say something about what you brought up and how important and how critical this was. Talks about what was just read here. It says that his obsession for alcohol was relieved by this. What he was talking was a hot flash experience, but it says by a sudden spiritual experience. So in We Agnostics, it refers to the book Varieties of Religious Experience by William James. And although they're referring to him, what it's doing is it's authenticating, but not eliminating it in case you didn't have it. And in that book, and I say that to say this, because Bill went around for the first 6 months telling all the drunks he could talk about how he saw Jesus on the way to Damascus, and they didn't want to hear about the Apostle Paul story. They went back to drinking. And what Dr. Silkworth told him is, Bill, talk drunk to a drunk. Let them know about the sickness, the allergy and the obsession. Let them identify with you. They've been being talked to by people standing outside of the cave, telling them what they need to do. You're someone who's been in the cave. Let them know you've been there. And the reason I say that is because in the book, Variety of Religious Experiences, it's a compendium of, that's a good word. That's what you guys call this, right? It's a compendium of experiences of people who have had a conversion experience at the depth and weight that Bill will, because they had to be in peril. They had to be at the end of a road that they could see no more light. They had to be in the abyss setting. And it didn't necessarily have to be alcoholism. They have an ego deflation. Anything we produce needs to go out of you. It has to be something. The result, they had these spectacular experiences. The reason that a lot of them were alluded to in the original story, and if you get a hold of a big book, or I think Language of the Heart now has the original 12 stories, personal stories that were in the original first edition, they were low-bottom psychotic drunks. When you have nowhere to go, when AA is not on Zoom, when it's not on the corner, when I can't go to an AA meeting 1,000 times a week in Cleveland, Ohio, when there's no AA in the phone booth, and I'm at the end of the road and all of a sudden hope comes along, it's going to look like I had an experience that was profound. And then what happened is alcoholics started to see these earmarks or symptoms of alcoholism and started to come in contact with the fellowship, even so much that in the 12 and 12, they said, hey, guess what we're going to do? We're going to raise the bottom. The drawback to that is you might not see the blinding light until you see the blinding light educationally. But we all eventually will see the light. The sad part is if I'm not at the point of total desperation, because in that one book that we've mentioned a couple of times, Bill W., The First 40 Years, or Not God by Ernst Kuntz, it talks about Bill standing there staring into the abyss as if he was looking the devil in the eyes. And it says when he got to the point, he's having an episode in his mind where he's thinking Ebby's crazy. And he said, but Ebby's sober. He said, maybe I'm crazy. Is there a God? Is Ebby? He's going back and forth in his mind like he's ready to snap. And he finally says, without any hope or faith, I cried out, if there be a God, let him show himself to me. And the room lit up. Now, I'm not saying we put God to the test. You know what I mean? Occasionally I'm walking down the street and say, God, give me a sign. What I'm saying is he was driven to the point of such a desperation and such a depth of despair that he cried out, taking a shot in something he did not believe in or know to exist. Because if there wasn't something else, it was doom, and he knew it. It was curtains at last. And something happened. Some of us still come in so beat without any exposure to AA after being drinking and in that situation for an extended period of time, the chronic stages of alcoholism, that they can still have that light experience. But that's probably more the exception than the rule nowadays, just because AA is a household name. Hell, you can watch it on a show.
Yeah. So I just want to backpedal there. Thanks, Bill. That was awesome. From this doctor, the broker had learned the grave nature of alcoholism. I said there that we'll be at the jumping off point because we're not going to be in here dying of alcohol, dying of drinking, right? We're going to be at the jumping off point. What is the nature of this disease? Let's go have a look. Let's just have a sneak preview of what the nature of this disease is and what Bill was talking about. On page 62, let's go over there. I'll wait for some of you. It's okay. Page 62. Welcome to anybody who've joined. We're on page 62 on the second paragraph. Selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. We have a disease of selfishness and self-centeredness, and it is centered in our mind. And from that, we can die. That is the grave nature of this disease. Though he could not accept all the tenets of the Oxford groups, which were actually known as the first century Christianity movement, he was convinced, they're talking about Bill here, this New York stockbroker, he was convinced of the need for moral inventory. What's that? That's step 4, right? Confession of personality defects. That sounds to me like a step 5. Restitution to those harmed. That's definitely an 8 and a 9, guys, right? Helpfulness to others. Step 12. And the necessity of belief in and dependence upon God. Steps 2 and 3. What I love about this is that it says here, if you look at that quick snapshot of those 6 tenets of the Oxford group, you work the steps, then you will finally acquire a faith in a power greater than yourself. We're not asking you to come in here with the faith. We're asking you work the steps, and you will organically be rooted and find a faith in a power greater than yourself. And there it is. Let's go see what the Oxford 6 steps were. Let's go to page 263. Let's go through what they are. Yeah, the tenets. Let's go see what their 6 steps were about. Page 263. Right at the top of the page. It's a quick little snapshot of the 6 steps of the Oxford group. 1, complete deflation. 2, dependence and guidance from a higher power. 3, moral inventory. 4, confession. 5, restitution. 6, continued work with other alcoholics. Sounds very familiar, right? And like I said, Bill, in true alcoholic fashion, doubled up on all of that. We love we're not going to have 6 steps. We're going to have 12 steps, right? Because we're not going to have one sandwich and a glass of milk. We're going to have 2 sandwiches and a glass of milk. For any of those that are new, that's a reference to Jim, and we'll be diving through that later on as we get through chapter 3.
If my memory serves me correctly, when he was coming up with these, the number of steps, if you will, what happened is he started to be reminded of some reason the 12 apostles came to his mind, and 12 just happened to be the number. It was spiritual. When you read the history, but the ironic thing was he was blocked. He couldn't do anything. He knew he needed to complete it, and stuff was going back and forth. And finally, one night he went up into his whatever room it was where he was doing the writing of this, and he just couldn't get anywhere. And he said he got quiet, and he said the pen almost picked itself up and began writing by itself. I mean, the history is amazing when you really get into the personal history, not what we talk about at the meetings, because we would scare people off if they started thinking that the pens were going to pick up and take my inventory for me. What would I need a sponsor for? But the reality is something was happening that can't be denied. And the ironic thing about it is anonymity. God remains anonymous for his handiwork in this. And if it's something that would repel people, it's almost kept dummied down. But when you get into Dr. Bob, the good old timers, it comes of age, past all the history, there are people that have dedicated their lives that are no longer with us, that have written books and done studies, and there's so much information. And I mean, my God, we're not even 90 years old yet. It's crazy all the books that would be written about this movement and what's manifested as a result of a guy just not wanting to drink in 1935 in Akron, Ohio. A little story that changed the world.
That changed the world, absolutely. Like it says here on Roman numerals XV, right? It says, this is only but a beginning, only the augury of a much larger future ahead. An augury is an omen, a sign of far greater things, right? AA is almost in every single country of the world. It's just mind-blowing. It's just amazing. Prior, we're going to continue reading Roman numerals XVI. For those that have just joined, welcome. Page 16 forward to 2nd edition. Prior to his journey to Akron, the broker, Bill W., had worked hard with many alcoholics on the theory that only an alcoholic could help an alcoholic, but he had succeeded only in keeping sober himself. So Bill was telling you, Nana, that he was running around telling everyone about the spiritual solution, God, ripping these alcoholics off their bar chairs, and they wanted nothing of that, because we come in here loaded with prejudice, loaded with resentment against a childhood God, loaded with, our intellectual mountain, the icy intellectual mountain, the shadow in which we stand. And Bill was succeeding in keeping himself sober. Great. And it was Dr. Silkworth that observed him and pulled him one side and said to him, Bill, like you said, Bill, less God, more drunk. You're a cave dweller. Speak to these cave dwellers about how they get out there. Oh, I love that. Thank you. The broker had gone to Akron on a business venture which had collapsed, leaving him greatly in fear that he might start drinking again. He suddenly realized that in order to save himself, he must carry his message to another alcoholic. And that alcoholic turned out to be the Akron physician.
Now, my sponsor pointed out, this is the first must in our book. He suddenly realized in order to save himself, he must carry his message to another alcoholic. That's very important. Bill Wilson was at the Mayflower Hotel. The Akron deal had gone bad. He was about 6 months sober, maybe 6.5 months sober at the time. Yeah, maybe 6 months actually, almost maybe perfectly 6 months sober. He didn't have enough money to pay the hotel bill. He was involved in a proxy cyberlings who owned some type of uh, rubber or steel syndicate, whatever it was, and the deal fell apart. And here he is in the in the lobby of the Mayflower Hotel. And I went there a few weeks ago because I was going to try and show a couple people in the UK. We gave them a tour of Dr. Bob's house, and now they cut that out, but you can watch it online. I went over to the Mayflower because 10 years ago, when I took my sponsor from Florida there, the payphone was left intact. An original payphone from 1935 was still there in this phone booth. And the bar had now turned into a restaurant because they've commercialized this hotel, and now it's gone. It's turned into the condominiums or apartments, unfortunately. But he's in the lobby of the hotel, and all of a sudden, he hears the tinkling of the glasses in the bar, and all of a sudden, he realizes he's under the influence. If it not at least alcohol, he's under influence of the atmosphere. And one thing that cave dwellers know is how to dwell in the cave, even if they ain't going to go in there and get them a cave woman. They can go into the cave and talk cave to the cave people. Well, he would have known how to strike up a conversation, he said. And he said, maybe I could have a couple drinks. Now he's 6 months sober. And his experience shows him that the last time he took the next first drink, it meant another debacle, and he ended up in Downs Hospital, had this experience. So he knew he was on thin ice. And suddenly the thought came to him, what about all them alcoholics in the Steve W. Compendium on March 4th in 2024 that won't have this thing? He thanked God for his sanity had been restored. And then he was directed over to this directory of names, where we'll get into the history the more this goes along. But this was a big moment for a self-centered guy who's driven by fear, who had hopes of this financial prosperity, which he desperately needed. His poor wife had been slaving. He had been helping drunks. No one was getting sober. And he goes there in the hope that this big business deal is going to set him up for life, and it falls apart. At that point, our life hangs in the balance and we don't know it. And here's a guy who's found something in the way of the solution. And if he picks up a drink, that history that we talked about that changed the world, that little story, another story's got to be done. And look how long it took for this one to manifest. I don't know if Alcoholics Anonymous, like the Washingtonians, would be forgotten, and how many generations of us where it was no longer talked about what might have been a series of events that could ever be duplicated in that type of majestic order to put Alcoholics Anonymous back together again or re-together again if it was extinct. I mean, this is big stuff, and we don't even know. I show up in AA and think they've been waiting for me for a long time. I'm sorry it took me so long to get here, but you're going to be much better off now that I'm here because I'm so consumed with myself. And here was a guy who had a thought that must have been a divine inspiration to say, wait a minute, if you take the drink, you may die. You may not die. But what about the millions to come that will? That's a big story right there.
That is a big story, because that is completely against the nature of an alcoholic to think of anyone else. We're in the epicenter of selfishness here, guys. I mean, that is just amazing. And if you want to just cast your eyes over to the chat group, for those that are listening to us on YouTube, tons of stuff on silkworth.net, and we'll put some of this in our chat as well, in the WhatsApp chat. There's some beautiful, beautiful images there. I'm just having a look at them now. Just thinking of how my life has changed because of that phone booth. My life and many others near me as well. Not just me, my family and friends, people I work with. Man.
I mean, that's like a big deal when Steve puts something in the chat afterward that kind of confirms what I said. So I mean, I was going from memory.
You're paying
I love this
attention,
group.
Bill. Look at that. What did it say? After all, God gave us brains to use, my brother. All right, we're going to continue reading. We're on Roman numerals page XVI. Welcome to those who just jumped in. Page 16, right at the bottom, this last paragraph. This physician had repeatedly tried spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, but had failed. But when the broker gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, the physician began to pursue the spiritual remedy for his malady with a willingness he had never before been able to muster. He sobered, never to drink again up to the moment of his death in 1950. You know, I was in this program for 7 years, not knowing what the problem was. I thought that I just had to come to meetings and not drink. I thought I had to phone one of you guys and not phone the dealer. And I tried that for 3 years, right? I did that because, yeah, I hung on for dear life. It didn't last very long. It was 3 years in, and a week before my third medal, you know, I picked up. My brain told me it would be a great idea to have a drink. And when I came back into these rooms in June 2020, I had the good fortune and the experience of God's grace to have somebody explain to me what this disease was. Because if I don't know what the problem is, I'm not going to pick up the solution that you're putting at my feet, the simple spiritual toolkit. I'm not going to pick it up. If I think it's just not drinking and going to meetings, and I'm forever, ever grateful to that human being that passed that message on to me, that gave away what she had been so freely, what had been so freely given to her. This seemed to prove that one alcoholic could affect another as no alcoholic could. I had been to a gazillion therapists, psychologists, yoga teachers, silent retreat yoga. I've had the fortune, the financial means to see some really top dollar self-help people. And it works. It works for a couple of weeks, maybe a month or two, and then it doesn't work. But it was when I came to you and when one alcoholic spoke to me in cave-dwelling language, in alcoholic language, one language of the heart, I understood, I finally understood what this disease was. And it was, that probably was the greatest spiritual experience I had, was the day that I realized I was an alcoholic, that I was in trouble with my mind, I was in trouble with my body, and then my spirit was raw and lacking God, higher power, because I was utterly powerless. It also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. I just want to bounce to working with others, just to, like we said, the book repeats itself many times, just to reiterate what they're saying here. One alcoholic working with another is vital to permanent recovery. If you are in a 12-step program and you are not doing 12-step work, you are not in a 12-step program, you're in an 11-step program. It says on page 89, right at the top, chapter 7, working with others, practical experience shows that nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking as intensive work with other alcoholics. That's the deal right there. The first thing my sponsor told me, she said, you're here and you're saving my life. And I looked at her, I thought she was completely insane. Besides the fact that she was smiling and giggling and all lovey-buggy and care bear, love, but beams flying out of her eyes. When she said that to me, I thought, this woman is completely cooked, but it's cool. Yeah, you know, I'll do whatever it takes. I'll do whatever she tells me. And I know now what that means. I know now what that means. The lifeblood of this program are the people, that the newcomers that are sitting here with us today.
It also.
Can't do without.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. And in there is a solution. It gets a little more threatening or intentional. It says our very lives as ex-problem drinkers depend on our constant thought of others and how we may help meet their needs. So ruthless concentration on self, right? Excessive concentration on self is what one of the medical views gave on alcohol, their observation of alcoholics. And it's interesting, in A Vision for You, it's talking about their first meeting, which is what this is alluding to in the forward. And it says, Dr. Bob knew that he had a drinking problem. He knew there was something abnormal about his drinking, but he did not know what it meant to be alcoholic. Not that it was from the medical perspective. He knew there was something wrong. And he was in the Oxford group. He knew that the spiritual remedy was the answer. But isn't it interesting that when Bill gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, the physician began to pursue the spiritual remedy for his malady with the willingness he had never before been able to muster. I think there's a principle in that statement. Know the truth, and the truth will set you free. He did not know the truth, but once he was given the truth, he got free. Nothing had changed. He wasn't any more or less alcoholic than before Bill Wilson gave him the description, but he let him know what the problem was. He didn't realize that it was an allergy of the body, an obsession of the mind. And when you read Dr. Bob's story, he did all sorts of stuff that it talks about in our book to try and switch. He went on the bear experiment and gained a bunch of weight and went back to this and that and the other thing. He knew there was something wrong with him. And in one of the books, and I believe it's in our it's in our AA conference approved literature, it talks about Henrietta talking to Bob alone. And the conversation went something to the effect, he was letting her know that he was a secret closet drinker. He was coming out, and they had a confession night. Some of the gals got together and they said that they had prompting from the spirit that tonight we were going to get naked. People are going to tell their secrets. And this is when Bob finally came out of the closet, so to speak, literally, and said, I'm a closet drinker. I'm a secret drinker at home, and I haven't been able to give it up. And he's talking to Henrietta. And she calls him over, and he wasn't as excited when he got there about the news. She said, I got an answer from the Lord, Bob. And Bob rushed right over. She said, the Lord told me you must not drink alcohol at all. He said, didn't he give you something better? But he knew there was something wrong with him. And in that conversation, he said, Henrietta, do you believe that I want to stop drinking? She said, Bob, I believe more than anything else you want to stop drinking. And then he said, yes, more than anything else. And she looked at him and said, Dr. Bob, you just haven't found a way yet. Keep trying. And when these phone calls, this hotel lobby situation that I guess we're going to finish probably here on this paragraph took place, when these phone calls were made, when Henrietta Cyberling answered the phone from Bill, and he was reluctant to call because if you remember a bit ago, I mentioned Cyberling's name was involved in that syndication takeover that had collapsed, and Bill was embarrassed to call. He thought that it was the wife of the person that he met with, and what it was the daughter-in-law. Nonetheless, she had prayed to the Lord. This was the kind of faith they had. She had prayed to the Lord for an answer to Dr. Bob's problem. And when Bill Wilson called and said, I'm a rum hound from New York, I need to talk to another alcoholic, she said, I've been waiting on your call. They had faith in a God that delivered. They had faith in a power greater than themselves that was able to move mountains. And even yet and still, we come in here and we experience the grace of God and the miracle of recovery. And how long do I come to a meeting and I announce that there's a problem that's still bigger than this God that set me free? Have I really taken the position? have I come to the conclusion that God is either everything or he's nothing. Sometimes I say the choice with my mouth, but my feet demonstrate that maybe sometimes I still think he's not enough. Shame on me. Thank you guys for letting me share today. Thank you, Nadia, so much.
I'm so glad that you shared that story, Bill, because that story just compounds that moment of silence that we have at every meeting, because it's in that moment of silence that we are praying for the still suffering inside and outside of these rooms. You guys praying years for me to come into these rooms. I've been praying years for you, newcomer, who's sitting here a couple of days in. We've been praying for you to be here with us. That prayer from Henrietta Seiberling was for Dr. Bob, for Bill to find his way to him. That at that turning point at the Mayflower Hotel. I mean, it's like blow your mind. On that amazing note, I think we're going to end right here. I'll mark it off for our next session. I mean, we were like on session 5 next week, and we haven't even gone through the first 16 pages of the book.
Did I mention the most important sentence? She said, "You're like manna from heaven." I forgot that part. She knew it was bread from heaven.
All right, Steve, I think you can stop recording. Thank you. We've come to the end. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being here with us tonight. Now, the floor is